Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. This cabin is reserved for premium travelers only. The words were delivered with poise, but the meaning landed like a slap. Colby Mercer paused, his worn brown leather briefcase still in hand. He had not even reached his seat before judgment made its entrance. The lead flight attendant, Danielle Reeve, stood tall in her midnight blue uniform, arms folded neatly. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. The chill in her tone did the work. Colby glanced down at the boarding pass in his other hand. Seat 2A. Premium. Exactly where he was supposed to be. But for Danielle, that designation came with assumptions, and he did not fit any of them. He wore a crisp white dress shirt under a dark navy blazer, plain black slacks, and shoes polished just enough to look respectable, not impressive. On his wrist, a modest Citizen mechanical watch ticked without fanfare. His briefcase bore the scrapes of years of meetings, travel, and grit. Nothing he wore screamed wealth. Nothing about him fit the mold of who usually sat in seat 2A. The air in the cabin was cool, calculated. The gold Stratus Link logo shimmered just above the galley entrance. Around Colby, conversation softened. A man in a navy suit from seat 2B shifted, staring over his glasses. Someone further back paused mid-scroll on their phone. Danielle looked at him again. Sir, this section is for elite members. Colby said nothing yet. His posture remained steady, composed. Nobody spoke. Not yet. But before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from today? Drop your city or state in the comments. Colby held out his boarding pass with calm precision, the same way he had done countless times before. Seat 2A, he said softly. It should be right here. Danielle Reeve didn't move. She didn't reach for the pass, didn't scan it, didn't even lean in to look. She just stared at him like his very presence required confirmation. We've had some check-in errors lately, she said, her tone firm but not loud. You may have been assigned incorrectly. Let me check with operations. But she didn't check. She simply turned to the flight tablet in her hand, tapped twice, and gave a tight nod to someone down the aisle. No confirmation, no badge scan, no request for ID, just dismissal. From seat 2B, the man in the navy suit, Troy Danvers, leaned over with a smirk that seemed too rehearsed. First time flying premium? He asked without looking at Colby directly. They're strict about who gets access these days. Looks can be deceiving, right? His voice had the polished arrogance of someone who didn't need to raise it to cut deep. Danielle gave a small laugh, not loud enough to be obvious, but loud enough for Colby to hear. Ethan Whitlow, the male flight attendant beside her, glanced at Colby, then quickly looked away. His silence said enough. There would be no help coming from that side of the aisle. Colby took a breath, not a frustrated one, a controlled, steady inhale, the kind he had mastered over the years. This wasn't new. Not really, it was just more public than usual. He held out his ID next. Boarding pass matches my name. Mercer Colby. I was confirmed through corporate. Again, Danielle barely looked. Corporate sometimes upgrades people last minute, she replied flatly. Doesn't always reflect on our manifest. And you're not listed as priority, so we need to hold until that's resolved. The word priority echoed in his mind longer than it should have, not because it mattered, but because of how often it had been used to exclude. He didn't wear a flashy watch or carry a designer bag. He didn't have the look, and that was enough for her, enough for Troy. Enough, it seemed, for the system that allowed this kind of quiet rejection to happen without question. Behind him, another passenger coughed, clearly aware of the tension but unwilling to step into it. The hum of the overhead vents seemed louder now, like even the aircraft knew something wasn't right. Colby looked around, not in search of help, but to remind himself where he was. Seat 2A, his name, his boarding pass, his right. But somehow none of that was enough to be seen. Danielle tapped her tablet again and muttered to Ethan, "Put a soft flag. We'll sort it mid-flight." Colby heard it. So did Troy, who grinned wider and leaned back like he had already won something. Colby remained still. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But the space around him felt narrower by the second, like the cabin had shrunk to just a single aisle of judgment. Have you ever felt invisible in a place you rightfully belonged? Have you ever had to explain your worth, only to watch it ignored? Danielle Reeve tapped twice on her flight tablet, then angled it slightly away from Colby as she whispered to Ethan, "Still unverified. Keep him soft flagged." Her tone was crisp, casual, like she was logging a tray of drinks, not a human being. Ethan gave a subtle nod, his eyes carefully avoiding Colby's. No one asked questions. No one paused to think. The assumption had already been made. This man didn't belong. Across the aisle, Troy Danvers stretched his legs into Colby's foot space and let out a long breath as if he had been burdened by the mere presence of someone outside his imagined social tier. "You know," he said, voice just loud enough for the row to hear, "this whole last-minute upgrade thing is getting out of hand. Flying used to mean something." He didn't look at Colby when he said it. He didn't have to. The target was clear. Colby's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained composed. He had heard lines like that before, not always so openly, not always so deliberate, but always delivered with the same weaponized politeness, the kind that let people say cruel things with a smile. Danielle moved closer now, hovering just beside Colby's seat. "Sir, if you're unable to provide verifiable priority status, I'll have to ask you to relocate until this is cleared." She held her tablet like a badge, as if technology alone gave her moral authority. "There are open seats in Standard. We'd be happy to accommodate you there." The offer landed like a bruise wrapped in silk, a demotion dressed up as convenience. Colby didn't move. He reached instead for the inner edge of his sleeve, carefully adjusting it to reveal the brushed metal of his smartwatch. A quick motion, almost unnoticeable but deliberate. He tapped twice. From that point forward, every sound, every data input, every visual from the cabin was uploaded, live and silently, to Clearview StratusLink's internal AI oversight system. Danielle didn't notice. She was too focused on containment. "We'll sort this once we're airborne," she added, then stepped back to the galley. Ethan lingered for half a second, glancing down at Colby with an unreadable expression, half discomfort, half complicity, before following. Troy smirked again, clearly pleased with himself. "Try not to take it personal," he muttered, sipping from a glass of seltzer. "It's just policy." The words snapped something quiet but deep, not rage, not panic, but something heavier, a tired ache that came from knowing exactly what was happening and how it would be excused. It wasn't just about the seat. It never had been. It was about the message behind the seat, about the idea that presence alone wasn't enough, that someone like him still had to justify why he deserved to sit in plain view. From behind, a woman cleared her throat and leaned slightly forward. Elderly, white, hair silver and pulled neatly into a twist. Her name was Loretta Hall, and though she hadn't said a word until now, her eyes had not left Colby since he boarded. "Excuse me," she said gently, addressing no one in particular, "but I believe I saw this gentleman board before me, assisted by the same gate agent I spoke with. He was checked in, same as anyone else." Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Danielle froze mid-step, glancing back. "Ma'am, thank you. We're handling it internally." Loretta did not blink. "Then handle it right." For a moment, silence filled the cabin again, but this time it was different, denser. There was resistance in it now, from a single voice that had decided to speak. Colby didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew the pattern by heart. First the assumption, then the delay, then the redirection, and always the dignity chipped away in quiet increments. But what they didn't expect, what they never accounted for, was that he had built systems for a living. He understood patterns, and he had come prepared. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to keep recording. Colby remained seated, his posture unchanged, but the atmosphere around him was no longer the same. Loretta Hall's simple act, just standing there, had shifted the rhythm of the entire cabin. No longer was he isolated. No longer was this just a quiet humiliation tucked behind corporate protocol. Now there were eyes, witnesses, evidence, and more than that, momentum. Isabel Monroe had just finished uploading her second clip, this time with Loretta in frame, standing beside Colby like a quiet monument of dignity, when the first wave of reactions hit her feed. Screenshots from the cabin, a passenger list leaked anonymously through a back channel, But most importantly, someone finally connected the dots. Is that Colby Mercer, the investor? A whisper on Skypulse. Then, wait, the systems guy, the logistics optimization CEO? Then louder, he owns a stake in StratusLink. And finally, why is he being flagged on his own airline? That sentence spread like sparks in dry grass. Within minutes, Isabel's DMs exploded. A regional transportation blogger tagged her in a post. Then came a former consultant from the aviation industry. Then a national reporter who simply asked, "Source confirmed?" Isabel didn't reply. She didn't need to. The footage was doing all the work. Back in the cabin, the Ripple reached seat 7A, where a young man in a hoodie pulled out his phone. He had been silent the entire time, but now his screen lit up with a headline. Colby Mercer profile shows up on internal watch system. Source leak from StratusLink gate. The young man turned to his seatmate. That's Colby Mercer. I saw him speak in Chicago last year. That guy streamlined half the cargo logistics for Eastern Rail. He's not just some guy. He's a damn architect of efficiency. Words spread through the plane like cabin pressure equalizing. Not everyone reacted outwardly, but they knew now. This wasn't a misplaced traveler. This was someone they had all benefited from, directly or indirectly. Someone who had reshaped how things moved, how systems ran, how people worked smarter instead of harder. Danielle didn't know it yet, but she was already too late. She walked briskly from the galley toward Colby's seat, tablet in hand, ready to push forward with her internal handling. Her voice, though composed, carried tension. "Sir, as of now, we're going to need you to move to the rear section. Until your status is cleared, remaining in this seat is against policy." She kept her tone corporate, precise, but beneath it was the same hollow certainty that she was right, that the process protected her. Colby didn't stand. He simply looked at her. "Which policy?" he asked calmly. "Show me where it says that a boarding confirmed passenger can be downgraded based on appearance." Danielle hesitated. Not for long, but long enough. Behind her, Troy Danvers chimed in again, mockingly helpful. "Oh, come on, just pull up the manifest and point to the rule. Should take 2 seconds." He grinned, thinking he had sided with authority. But the smile faded when Isabel spoke from the fourth row. Louder this time. "There's no such rule," she said, her phone still in hand, camera still recording. "I've flown this airline 6 times this year. You don't downgrade without cause. And right now you've provided none." Danielle turned. "Ma'am, you're not involved." Isabel stood. "I am now." And that moment, small, precise, cracked the silence wide open. The young man in the hoodie spoke next. "If that's Colby Mercer, you're profiling a stakeholder. That's not policy. That's liability." A passenger near the front pulled out their tablet and tapped open a browser. "He's listed on StratusLink's board of operational advisors," they said aloud, screen tilted toward the aisle. "Public record." Someone else whispered, "They flagged him on purpose." Another added, "You can't just erase people. Not anymore." Danielle's jaw flexed. She glanced down at her screen again, then toward the front of the aircraft. Ethan looked at her from the galley. She gave a subtle nod. He hesitated on just a flicker, then stepped forward. But just before he reached Colby, Isabel's phone pinged. New reply on Skypulse. A StratusLink employee, anonymous ID, had posted one line. "Clear view is active. Everything's recording." She looked up at Ethan and said almost gently, "You should stop. Now." Ethan froze, his hand midair. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Colby remained still. But inside, everything had shifted. This wasn't just about him anymore. The narrative had broken wide open, and the system was finally watching itself. Ethan stood motionless. His hand hovered between action and retreat, his eyes darting from Colby to Isabel to the growing wave of passengers now clearly paying attention. For the first time since boarding, the facade of silent obedience was cracking. The cabin wasn't just filled with quiet judgment anymore. It pulsed with awareness, and the system they had relied on to bury missteps had just turned on them. Danielle tapped twice on her flight tablet, but this time the screen pushed back. A red alert pulsed across the top banner. Clear view alert. Manual flag detected without scan confirmation. Incident logged. Internal compliance activated. Her finger froze. Ethan saw it too. His posture straightened, but not with confidence, with realization. At the back of the galley, a young female crew member named Minji Lee watched everything unfold from her jump seat monitor. She had joined Stratus Link just 9 months ago, still under probation, still adjusting to the unspoken codes that govern premium service culture. She had been warned. Never question a lead, never contradict a senior in front of passengers, always default to the flight chain. But today something was different, because today she had watched Danielle override a manifest entry without scanning, then flag a seated passenger as unverified, all while dismissing his documents and voice. Minji's hands shook slightly as she typed into her internal reporting log. Internal breach, possible racial bias. Passenger, Colby Mercer, flagged without procedural cause. Crew present, Danielle Reeve, Ethan Whitlow. Timestamp 1406. She hesitated, then added one final line. I witnessed it. I do not consent. The log auto-synced to Clearview's live review queue. Up front, Danielle's screen buzzed again. This time it was a message from internal ops, appearing as a secure banner across her interface. Compliance review in progress. Actions on record. Proceed with caution. Her fingers tensed. The control she thought she had was unraveling, one data point at a time. Across the aisle, Colby had still not moved. He had not raised his voice. He had not argued. But the world around him was no longer able to pretend he was invisible, and he knew the shift was irreversible. Ethan stepped back. Just one step, but it was enough. Isabel saw it. Loretta saw it. Even Troy saw it. That step wasn't procedural. It was psychological. It was the moment when a uniformed crew member realized he might be standing on the wrong side of the story. Danielle tried to recover. She looked at Colby and said, Sir, please understand, this is about verification, nothing more. But her voice lacked the clarity it once had. The words rang hollow, too polished, too late. Colby finally spoke. I understand, he said, calm and measured. I understand that verification only became urgent when I sat in seat 2A. I understand that every step of protocol has been weaponized to feel polite while erasing dignity. And I understand now that the system you trust to cover you has already begun logging the truth. Danielle blinked. Once, slowly. A passenger 3 rows behind whispered to their seatmate, Did he say Colby Mercer? Like the Colby Mercer? The answer came not in words but in the sudden silence that followed. Yes, that Colby Mercer, the systems guy, the architect, the stakeholder, and now the witness. Back in the galley, Minji watched the Clearview interface update live. A new entry populated, verbal denial of bias concern, attempted justification of procedural override, active review, do not delete. She closed her eyes briefly, then reached for her headset. Cabin control, she said softly. I need to report a procedural escalation. Cabin lead actions possibly violate company integrity standards. The silence that followed was long. Then, understood, continue documentation, you are protected. Minji looked down at her ID badge. She wasn't anyone important, not yet, but she had seen enough to know that staying silent was no longer an option. Not with this flight, not with this man. Colby sat still. The cabin wasn't tense anymore. It was electric. Passengers weren't just watching, they were waiting. Because the system had been watching too, and now it was watching itself. The silence inside the cabin no longer felt like tension. It felt like calculation. It was the kind of quiet that descends when a machine realizes it has glitched, when all the parts that once operated in sync begin to stutter, misfire, and reveal the fault line running underneath. Colby had not moved, but now every word, every click, every hesitation around him was becoming evidence. Clearview was recording, witnesses were watching, and inside the hidden layers of Stratus Link's operations, the alarm bells had begun to ring. From her terminal at headquarters, Elena Ruiz, Stratus Link's senior legal counsel, watched the real-time Clearview feed through a secured channel. The flagged entries, the overrides, the lack of scan confirmation, they were no longer isolated errors. They were patterns. Elena had seen enough. She tapped into the internal chain reserved for executive audit triggers and entered one line. Override lock initiated, Preserve full log. Notify ethics compliance immediately. On the plane, Danielle Reeves' tablet blinked twice, then froze. The interface dimmed slightly and a gray overlay spread across the screen with a final message. Access suspended pending review. Data lock active. Her thumb hovered midair, useless now. Ethan looked over from his position near the galley and saw her expression shift. Not anger, but fear. They both knew what that message meant. They were no longer in control of the narrative. Passengers had begun to murmur more openly now, not just in hushed tones. Someone near row 5 said, "Her screen just froze." Another whispered, "That's what happens when the company steps in." Isabel Monroe received a ping from one of her sources, a screenshot of the override command sent by Elena herself. She read the attached message. "Ethics team is watching. Don't stop recording." At that moment, Colby's smartwatch vibrated once. He glanced at the screen. A short message flashed across. "Override confirmed. Logs preserved. You are protected." He didn't smile. Not yet. But the shift was visible. In his breath, in the soft square of his shoulders, in the steady gaze he kept on the aisle ahead. He knew now. This was no longer a confrontation. This was documentation. And the system itself was choosing sides. Danielle turned to Ethan. Her voice for the first time faltered. "We need to get ahead of this," she whispered. "Flag the seat again. Maybe reset the cabin report." But Ethan didn't respond. His eyes remained on Colby, a man who had said almost nothing, and yet undone the structure they thought was unshakable. Loretta Hall remained standing near seat 2A, her posture firm. She had not moved an inch since she got up, and when Danielle glanced toward her, Loretta didn't flinch. Instead, she spoke again, low and even. "I've seen people try to bury truth before. They never realize how loud it becomes when you silence the wrong person." Danielle stepped back as if the words had weight. Minji Lee, still in the galley, finished her third log entry of the hour. This time, she didn't bother with politeness. Her report read, "Chain of command compromised, procedural integrity broken, passenger remains compliant, escalation visible, recommend full accountability." Isabel now stood halfway down the aisle. She wasn't narrating anymore, just filming. Her feed had crossed 200,000 live viewers. Her tag? Charcuteur's flight profiled. Shari, seat 2A. The passengers felt it too. They weren't just spectators now. They were part of the record. One by one, devices were lifted. Cameras pointed. No more fear of policy. The policy had turned in their favor. Suddenly, the forward cabin screen, which usually displayed flight time, weather, and route, flickered once. Then a corporate message appeared. "Stratus Link Compliance Protocol. Internal review active. Please remain seated while we address a service integrity matter." Passengers exchanged glances. One woman near seat 1B leaned over to her partner and said, "This is the kind of thing that ends careers." Danielle tried to make an announcement, but her mic was no longer active. The cabin intercom had been temporarily disabled by HQ. She looked to Ethan for support, but he had taken a step back, closer to the service wall, away from the aisle, away from her. Colby sat still. The system was no longer pretending to protect itself, and justice didn't always enter with noise. Sometimes it arrived in silence and rewrote everything from the inside out. The cabin lights dimmed briefly, then flickered back to full brightness. For a moment, it felt like turbulence without movement, as if the plane itself was responding to the tension inside. Colby remained still, but the silence around him was loaded. Every eye was turned forward. Every phone was recording. And then the announcement came, not from the crew, not from the cockpit, but from the very top. Elena Ruiz's voice cut through the air, not with authority, but with precision. It came from the cabin speakers, overridden from headquarters, firm and unmistakable. "This is Elena Ruiz, General Counsel for Stratus Link Aviation. What you are witnessing is an active compliance audit in response to conduct concerns raised during pre-departure operations. Please remain seated." The passengers turned to each other in stunned silence. A few lowered their phones, unsure of what would come next. Then Elena continued, "We are confirming that Mr. Colby Mercer currently seated in 2A, is a verified stakeholder and executive systems advisor for StratusLink. His presence on this flight is part of a scheduled internal review authorized by senior leadership. Any actions taken to obstruct, delay, or challenge his rights as a passenger will be reviewed as a violation of company ethics policy and federal aviation standards. The words struck like steel dropped onto marble. Sharp, final, unmistakable. Colby didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Around him, the atmosphere shifted again. Not into applause, but into reckoning. The murmurs returned, only now they were aimed in a single direction. Danielle. She staggered back one step. Her mouth opened as if to object, but the intercom remained under HQ control. She turned to Ethan, who simply shook his head once. Not defiant, resigned. And then Loretta Hall, still standing like a sentinel, added softly but clearly, "Now they know who they tried to erase." Isabel Monroe didn't speak. She posted a still image of Colby, calmly seated, hands folded over his briefcase. Her caption read, "The man they tried to disappear owns the seat they tried to take. You're shock, Colby Mercer, just shocks in clear view now." It went viral in under 5 minutes. In the rear galley, Minji Lee received a direct message on her crew channel. It wasn't from a supervisor, it was from Elena. Short, final, clear. "Minji, you did the right thing. Remain observant. HQ has assumed full operational authority on this flight." The screen above the forward cabin doors updated again. This time, no route or weather information, just 6 words in bold white type. "All flight crew under compliance review." Someone gasped. Another whispered, "This has never happened before." And then, almost quietly, a new voice came through. A male voice. Calm, crisp, measured. "This is Michael Sterling, Interim Director of Aviation Oversight for StratusLink Corporate." It was the voice of consequence. Effective immediately, crew members involved in this matter are relieved of active duty pending internal investigation. This includes Cabin Lead Danielle Reeve and First Officer Ethan Whitlow. Ethan slumped back against the service wall. Danielle stood frozen, her tablet, still darkened, tipped slightly in her hand, as if her grip had finally weakened. Colby turned his head, not dramatically, not with vengeance, but with clarity. He looked at Danielle for the first time since the confrontation began and said evenly, "This was never about power, it was about truth. And now, it's not just mine." Someone near row 3 whispered, "This is history." Loretta sat back down slowly, and in doing so, she closed a chapter, not of the flight, but of what people thought could still go unseen. Danielle Reeve took a step back, then another. Her eyes darted between passengers, searching for something, support maybe, or a crack in their resolve. But there was none. Her voice had once commanded silence in this cabin. Now it could barely fill the space around her. She glanced down at her tablet again, the screen still dark, still locked out by the override. That device had once given her authority. Now it was just a dead weight in her hands. Ethan Whitlow moved first. He unclipped his lapel badge, the metallic insignia of a first officer catching the light, and set it quietly on the jump seat tray beside him. No words, just that sound, the light clink of surrender. He did not look at Colby. He looked down, not out of shame, but understanding. He had seen enough, and perhaps in that moment he saw himself, how easily silence becomes complicity. Danielle looked at him in disbelief, then turned slowly back toward the aisle. Colby met her gaze, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the kind of stillness that holds power without needing to declare it. "This didn't start with you," he said quietly, "but it ends with you here." Danielle's lips trembled slightly, her jaw clenched, but she said nothing, and in that silence the verdict landed heavier than any shout. From the rear of the aircraft, Minji Lee emerged, walking with careful steps down the aisle. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. As she approached Danielle and Ethan, she paused, then looked directly at both of them. "Compliance has taken over," she said. "You are no longer part of this flight's active crew. Please return to the galley until you are escorted." Her voice did not shake. It wasn't angry. It was professional, precise, and deeply human. Danielle hesitated, then finally turned, heels echoing on the cabin floor as she walked away. Passengers watched in stunned silence. No one clapped. No one jeered. No one. They simply watched. And sometimes that kind of silence speaks louder than applause. Ethan followed behind her, slower, his shoulders heavy. And then came the shift, almost imperceptible at first. A woman in 1C, maybe early 50s, reached into her purse and pulled out a notepad. She scribbled something, stood up, and handed it to Colby as she passed his seat on the way to the restroom. He glanced at the note. 5 words written in soft script. "You were never alone here." Then a voice came from row 6. A man in a charcoal blazer raised his voice just enough to be heard. "I used to think these things were exaggerated, but today, I watched it with my own eyes, and it's not exaggerated, it's engineered." Isabel Monroe, still filming, nodded slowly. "That's why we document, not because we want drama, but because too many people call injustice a misunderstanding." From 3A, another passenger, mid-30s, light brown hair, quiet up to now, stood halfway. "They told me I made priority status because I booked enough flights, but maybe the real criteria was what I looked like walking on board." Someone behind him added, "Or who they assumed you weren't." Loretta Hall sat quietly, her hands clasped on her lap, but her presence still anchored the moment. She didn't need to stand again. She had already shifted the tide with her voice once, and in that silence, others filled the space. The young man in the hoodie from earlier leaned into the aisle and said, "I came here thinking it was just another flight. I'm leaving knowing it was a turning point." Colby said nothing. He didn't need to. His face remained calm, but in his eyes there was a quiet reflection, not of ego, but of burden. Because when power returns to you after it's been denied, it brings with it not just justice, but responsibility. The cabin doors remained closed, the engine still off. But the entire aircraft had transformed, not in altitude, but in awareness. And then, as if on cue, the overhead screen shifted once more. This time it displayed the Stratus Link emblem, followed by a new message. "Protocol clear view now active fleet-wide. Passenger dignity protocols rolling out immediately. Internal training audit under federal observation." The reactions were quiet, but they rippled. A woman whispered, "They're doing it, for real." Someone near the back muttered, "Finally," and another. It took one man, but all of us saw it. Colby took a long breath. He wasn't preparing for a speech. He was grounding himself. Because what happened next wasn't just about fixing a flight. It was about what happens when truth becomes too big to contain. And on that flight, at 38,000 feet or not, they were no longer just passengers. They were part of a reckoning. Colby sat still for several minutes after the last announcement. The weight of the moment settled across his shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a mantle. Around him, the cabin was silent, save for the hum of quiet breathing and the occasional vibration of phones still lighting up with updates. Nobody rushed to move. No one called for takeoff. The flight no longer needed altitude to feel meaningful. It had already taken off, morally, socially, structurally. When Colby finally stood, he didn't do it for show. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, lifted the worn leather briefcase by his side, and stepped into the aisle. Not a single passenger looked away. Phones were down, heads were lifted. For once, the world wasn't watching through screens. It was watching in real time, person to person, truth to truth. He walked toward the forward cabin, not with swagger, but with purpose. His destination wasn't the cockpit nor the door. It was a conversation. Minji stood by the galley, her face a careful mix of nerves and conviction. When Colby stopped beside her, he didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded, acknowledging something beyond words. She understood. She nodded back. 2 professionals, one young and new, the other seasoned and quietly powerful, connected not by role, but by principle. Then came the final message, broadcast not from a corporate suite or legal console, but from Colby himself, delivered to every passenger, every crew member still listening, and every viewer now tuned in live through social media streams. "This isn't just about a seat," he began, his voice firm but grounded. "It's about the architecture we build around dignity. We talk about first class like it's comfort, But real first class is how people are treated, regardless of what row they sit in. He paused, then looked toward Loretta, toward Isabel, toward the passengers who had spoken up. Not loudly, but clearly. Today, something cracked, not because someone raised their voice, but because someone refused to shrink. And that refusal, when echoed by others, becomes unbreakable. He stepped forward, raising his smartwatch slightly. With a single motion, he activated a command, one he'd been building for months. On every screen throughout the aircraft, a new banner appeared. Launching Horizon Equity Framework, powered by Stratus Link, effective immediately. The message was simple, but it signaled a tectonic shift. This wasn't a policy review, it was a system rewrite. Colby turned back to the cabin. This aircraft won't leave the ground today, but something greater just lifted off. Starting now, Horizon will audit every decision, every flag, every override, automatically and without exception. No one will be erased in silence again. Loretta whispered, "Amen." And the man behind her whispered, "That's how systems change." A teenager in the rear of the cabin began to cry quietly, not from fear, but from something more complex. Recognition, hope, a sense that even in airspace, humanity mattered. And then Isabel's phone pinged one last time. A video had just gone live, posted by an anonymous former employee of Stratus Link. It was a recorded internal memo, time-stamped 2 years prior, in which a junior technician had flagged patterns of discrimination in profile review systems. The memo was ignored, buried, until now. Beneath it, the employee wrote only one line. "He made us visible again." The cabin didn't erupt in applause, it didn't need to. Passengers rose slowly one by one, nodding toward Colby, toward one another, toward the door that now stood open, not just to the jet bridge, but to a new standard. Colby exited last, not as a man who had won a battle, but as someone who had changed the map. And when his foot touched the terminal floor, a quiet message lit up on his watch. Fleet protocol engaged. Horizon system now live on 87 routes. He smiled, just slightly, and walked forward, not just toward baggage claim or boardroom, but toward the kind of future that begins with someone staying seated when the world tried to move them out. If you've ever been dismissed because of how you look, if you've ever been told you don't belong here, if you've ever sat in silence while others decided what you were worth, then this story is yours too. Colby Mercer didn't just defend a seat, he reclaimed a truth, and in doing so, he rewrote the rules for everyone who comes after. So here's the question. Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you earned your right to be seen? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being profiled or mistreated on a flight, in a workplace, or in public? Speak your truth below. Because when voices rise together, change follows. And it always begins with one moment, one person who chooses to stay seated when the world tells them to move.